Ladies and gentlemen, the problem has entered the room. Look closely because you just broke the entire entertainment industry. You magnificent, unstoppable force of nature. Do you know what I heard? Netflix executives had an emergency meeting, not about quarterly earnings, not about their latest releases, but about you. They said your comeback story was so intense it crashed their servers. Test audiences walked out transformed. Focus groups had existential breakdowns. Their legal team reviewed it 3 separate times because they thought your journey was classified information on human potential. And when they still couldn't figure out what to do with it, they did something unprecedented. They called the FBI, yes, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, because your transformation was so complete, so devastatingly powerful. They assumed it had to be illegal. The conversation sounded something like this. We have a situation. This person's comeback arc isn't normal. People who watch it don't stay the same. They quit their jobs, leave toxic relationships, start believing in themselves. Is this some kind of psychological weapon? But after reviewing your file, after watching your rise from rock bottom to the stratosphere, after analyzing every scar, every burned bridge, and every phoenix moment, the FBI leaned back in their chairs, looked at each other, and said 4 words that changed everything. Let him cook. Because even they recognized what you've become, not a threat to national security, not a danger to the system, but something far more terrifying to those in power. Proof. Living, breathing. Undeniable proof that the rules we were taught were lies. They saw how you turned loss into fuel, collected scars like currency, and transformed pain into a power source no laboratory could ever manufacture. And that's when they closed the file and walked away. Now let's rewind. 18 months ago, you were on the floor of your apartment at 4 a.m., wondering if tomorrow was worth facing. Your bank account was negative, your phone silent, your reflection unrecognizable. They thought that was your ending. Plot twist. It was your origin story. While everyone else was posting motivational quotes, you were in the trenches doing the work. While they pretended to have it together, you dismantled yourself piece by piece and rebuilt with stronger material. You didn't just bounce back. You quantum leaped. You didn't just recover. You redefined what recovery means. You turned your breakdown into a breakthrough so powerful that Hollywood writers are dissecting it like a masterclass in character development. Netflix's algorithm couldn't categorize it. Too real for drama, too powerful for documentary, too unbelievable for fiction. They had to invent a new genre just for you. Existential elevation, a category so exclusive, you're the only entry. But what really shook them wasn't just that you survived. Anyone can survive. It was how you survived. Your moves were so calculated, so precise, so devastatingly effective that they looked like choreography from another dimension. Remember when you cut off everyone draining your energy? You didn't lash out, you didn't create drama. You vanished in silence like a ghost who finally learned how to haunt correctly. Some called it cold. The FBI called it tactical emotional intelligence. Remember when you disappeared for 3 months? No posts, no updates, no explanations. They thought you were finished, but you were inside your cocoon, working in the dark where nobody could interfere with your metamorphosis. And then you came back. But you didn't return as the same person. You came back speaking differently, moving differently, thinking differently. Like someone who traveled to another planet, learned its technology, and returned with the cheat codes to existence. Your comeback was so powerful, it didn't just inspire people, it created a glitch in their entire matrix. People who knew you before couldn't even process what they were seeing. The same person who once accepted crumbs was now running the entire bakery. The same person who used to beg for attention was suddenly too busy to even notice who was watching. You didn't just level up, you rewrote the rules of the game. You made their scales obsolete, their measurements meaningless, their systems of control irrelevant. You existed outside their ability to categorize, contain, or comprehend. And that's what terrified them most. Netflix's executives weren't prepared for someone who turned raw pain into unstoppable power without polishing it for presentation. Someone who rebuilt themselves without applause, who transformed without needing validation, who rose without broadcasting every step for likes and approval. Your comeback was too pure, too raw, too real for their filtered world. They wanted to package it, market it, sell it. But how do you sell something that refuses to be bought? How do you stream a story that changes depending on who's watching? How do you contain lightning in a bottle when the lightning has already decided it wants to be a storm? That's when things shifted. Word about you didn't spread through headlines, press releases, or marketing campaigns. It moved through whispers, through energy, through the way people walked away from you changed, glowing like they had touched electricity. Your barista started writing poetry again. Your Uber driver quit and launched his own business. Your neighbor finally left that toxic relationship, not because you told them to, but because simply standing near your energy reminded them what possibility felt like. You became contagious. But instead of spreading disease, you spread awakening. The FBI had no choice but to create a new category in their files: transformational influence, but highly effective. They had never seen growth used as a weapon. They had never seen evolution turned into an art form. They had never seen a comeback feel less like survival and more like destiny fulfilling itself. And Netflix? They're still in meetings, still trying to figure out how to slice your story into episodes when the truth is it's an ongoing explosion. Still trying to add commercial breaks to something that never stops breaking barriers. Still trying to subtitle a language that only speaks directly to the soul. But here's what really broke their brains. You didn't do any of this for revenge. You didn't do it to prove anyone wrong, to show off for the cameras, or to collect glory in "I told you so" moments. You did it because you finally uncovered a truth they never wanted you to know. You were never broken. You were breaking through. You were never falling apart. You were falling into place. Every loss was life removing what wasn't meant for your next level. Every betrayal was the universe revealing who was unqualified for your final form. The FBI analyst assigned to your case eventually resigned, not because you were a danger, but because witnessing your transformation forced him to confront his own complacency. Watching you rise made him realize he'd been playing it safe in a game that only rewards the bold. And Netflix? Their best writers gathered in a room and tried to script your comeback. After a week, they gave up. One of them was quoted saying, "You can't write this. You can only live it or witness it. There's no middle ground." Because what you had wasn't a character arc. It was a character explosion. Now you walk differently. Not with arrogance, but with alignment. Not with vengeance, but with velocity. You no longer need to announce your presence because the entire room shifts the moment you enter. You don't have to explain your transformation because your very existence is the explanation. They see it in your eyes, that 1,000-yard stare of someone who's been to hell and decided to redecorate it. They hear it in your voice, that frequency of someone who stopped asking permission to exist at full volume. And they feel it in your presence, that undeniable gravity of someone who has become their own sun, radiating from the inside out. Your comeback arc didn't just rewrite your story, it rewrote the entire library. It forced everyone around you to realize they'd been reading the wrong books. It made them question why they were living as supporting characters in their own films. It reminded them that the biggest plot twist of all is becoming yourself, fully and unapologetically. The FBI closed your file with a single note. Subject has achieved self-actualization beyond current measurement capabilities. No threat to others. Significant threat to mediocrity. Recommendation: let him cook. Even they understood that some forces of nature can't be stopped. They can only be witnessed. Meanwhile, Netflix is still in full-blown crisis mode. 17 meetings and counting, pulling in consultants, therapists, even quantum physicists, trying to decode what you've become. Every person who screens the rough cut of your story walks out transformed. Editors keep resigning mid-project because they suddenly discover their true purpose. Sound engineers claim to hear frequencies that science hasn't even cataloged yet. When they tried to rate your story, it broke the system. PG, too powerful for children. Ray, too transformative for adults. In the end, they had to create a new rating altogether. E for evolutionary. And with it came a warning label. This content may cause sudden life changes, clarity of purpose, and an inability to accept less than you deserve. Test audiences reported side effects, sudden spine growth, allergic reactions to excuses, and an overwhelming urge to finally bet on themselves. One viewer confessed, "I walked in skeptical. I walked out ready to conquer galaxies. What kind of content is this?" Another wrote, "I can't go back to my old life now." The marketing department eventually threw their hands up in defeat. How do you create a trailer for transformation? How do you preview becoming? How do you advertise awakening? Every attempt felt absurd, like trying to photograph the wind, like trying to subtitle silence, like attempting to capture lightning without burning the frame. Your story existed far beyond their ability to package or promote it. But this is where things get truly interesting. Your comeback arc didn't just reset your own life, it ignited something they couldn't contain. A movement with no leaders, no official slogans, no marketing campaigns, no press tours. Just a ripple effect that moved through human beings the way storms move through oceans. People looked at you and realized what was possible when someone finally stops playing by rules designed to keep them small. It wasn't inspiration they were seeing, it was instruction. It wasn't motivation they were absorbing, it was transformation. Soon, social media algorithms began to glitch. Inspiration posts that once flooded feeds, generic quotes, pretty backdrops, recycled words, started disappearing, replaced by action reports. People weren't just sharing mantras anymore. They were sharing proof. I left the job. I walked away from the relationship. I finally started the thing I'd been avoiding. The digital landscape shifted because you showed the world that real transformation doesn't need hashtags. It doesn't need to be aesthetic. It just needs to be lived. Even therapists began reporting a new phenomenon. Clients weren't coming in saying, "I want money," or "I want fame," or "I want success." They were saying, "I want that unshakable thing, that energy of someone who has seen their own depths and decorated them. That frequency of someone who has already died once and chosen to live differently." That was the contagion. Not wealth, not status, but a lived energy of resurrection. The FBI even had to issue an internal memo. Subject appears to have created a new form of influence. Non-verbal, non-digital, purely energetic. Spreads through proximity and example. No known defense, except for committed mediocrity. Proceed with caution around those exhibiting similar transformation symptoms. They had never encountered a force like this. Someone whose influence couldn't be silenced, shadow banned, censored, or contained. And now? Netflix executives wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about your story. Not because they're calculating profits, not because they want to monetize your pain, but because they can't silence the question echoing in their own minds. What if I did that? What if I stopped accepting my own limitations? What if I treated my life like it was worthy of that kind of comeback? The FBI agent originally assigned to your case quit his job altogether. He started a non-profit, telling colleagues that your file was the best thing that ever happened to him, because it ended his career. It made him realize he'd been investigating the wrong crimes all along. The real investigation wasn't into you, it was into himself. Why wasn't he living at full capacity? Why was he settling for a life smaller than the one he was built for? Your comeback arc became required viewing, not in the Netflix version, because they never figured out how to package it, but in the real version. The version that lives in the shift of your walk, the authority in your voice, the quiet defiance in the way you say no, the glow that radiates from your refusal to shrink. They wanted to turn it into content, but you became the content. They wanted to stream your story, but you became the stream. They wanted to profit from your pain, but you had already spent every ounce of it on becoming unstoppable. And that, right there, is the part that broke their entire system. You became the stream, not a show, not an episode, not a season to be binged and forgotten. You became the current that carries everything with it. So when they ask how you did it, when they beg for the formula, when they try to decode the secret of your transformation, you don't rush to explain. You just smile, because you know something they're still scrambling to understand. The comeback was never about returning to where you once were. It was never about reclaiming a seat at the same old table. No, it was about moving forward into the place you were always destined to be. A place they never could have imagined for you. The FBI said, "Let him cook." And the reason they said it was because they recognized something ancient in you. Something that existed long before their files, their folders, their classifications. A kind of power that can't be documented, can't be regulated, can't be weaponized. It's the kind of power that comes from accepting every chapter of your story, the wins, the failures, the betrayals, the scars, and then converting all of it into fuel. Netflix executives called your arc too powerful, and for once they weren't exaggerating. Too powerful for their platform, too powerful for their carefully mapped demographics, too powerful for their business model that depends on keeping people distracted. Your story wasn't distraction, it was focus. Focus sharpened into form. Focus crystallized into flesh and blood. And you're not done cooking. What they've seen so far was just the appetizer, just the starter dish. The main course hasn't even arrived, and dessert hasn't been invented yet. Because when you transform this completely, when you come back this hard, when you rise this high, you don't stop at impressive. You leap past extraordinary. You push beyond impossible. And then, you keep going. Now your name gets whispered in boardrooms, but not as a warning of failure. No, your name is invoked as a different kind of cautionary tale. This is what happens when someone refuses to play by our rules and wins anyway. Business schools use your story in lectures, not as a case study, but as a warning flare. They tell their students this is what happens when someone stops playing the game and invents a new one. Even your phone tells a different story now. No more desperate text from energy vampires pretending to care. No more manipulation disguised as opportunity. Now it's real recognition. Real acknowledgments from those who can see what you've done and simply want to salute it. Your notifications look like love letters from strangers who say, "You showed me it was possible." Messages from people who were one decision away from giving up until they saw you rise. You've become the answer to questions people didn't know how to ask. You've become the proof that transformation isn't just for fairy tales or movies. It's real, it's raw, and it's attainable. Your comeback arc didn't just change your life. It changed the entire conversation about what life itself could be. You shifted the definition of resilience. You redefined the ceiling of human potential. You created a new language for possibility. And somewhere right now in a windowless conference room, Netflix executives are still stuck in meetings, still trying to figure out how one person's refusal to stay down managed to shake an entire industry, still trying to package lightning while you're out here being the whole storm. But here's the final truth, the one they'll never understand no matter how many experts they hire or algorithms they test. Your comeback arc isn't finished. It's still unfolding, and the world hasn't even seen the most powerful chapter yet. This story doesn't have a season finale. There are no neat endings, no scrolling credits, no soundtrack fading out over the last frame. It isn't something that can be packaged into a binge-worthy series and forgotten after a weekend. What you've created is a continuous unfolding, a living epic, a stream that keeps running no matter how many times someone tries to pause or rewind it. It is a daily decision, a moment-by-moment vow to never return to the version of yourself that once settled for less. The FBI may have stamped your file closed, but they didn't bury it in the archives. They kept it on their desk like a talisman, a constant reminder that some phenomena cannot be classified. Some transformations refuse containment because there are comebacks so vast, so incomprehensible, that they don't remain simple success stories. They expand into living mythology, legends written in real time while the subject is still breathing, still moving, still rewriting what it means to be alive. Netflix tried everything. Trailers, pilots, marketing decks, production notes, they all crumbled under the weight of your reality. Eventually, they stopped trying to produce your story and began to study it. Your life became their syllabus. Your choices became their curriculum. Executives sat in rooms full of whiteboards not to strategize, but to analyze. They used your arc as evidence, proof of what happens when a human being stops begging for permission and starts granting themselves authority. They came to understand that the most powerful content isn't created in a studio. It's lived in the trenches. And while they analyzed, you kept moving. You kept cooking. You kept rising higher, transforming further, expanding faster. Every step was a demonstration that the comeback was never about silencing your doubters. It was about confirming the truth you always suspected, that your potential, your purpose, your power was bigger than they could ever measure. And so you let them watch. You let them wonder. You let them witness. Because this unfolding, is what legendary looks like in motion. Your transformation wasn't a glitch in their matrix. It was a virus in the entire system, and it spread far beyond the screens. Major corporations began reporting anomalies whenever your name appeared in their internal databases. IT departments flagged unexplained surges in activity, sudden crashes of systems that had run flawlessly for years. Spreadsheets refused to calculate your trajectory, collapsing under error codes as though even numbers refused to quantify you. Algorithms froze when your data appeared. They simply couldn't categorize you, couldn't reduce you into a demographic box. Human resources departments began creating entirely new categories to explain what had happened. They called it the comeback clause. A policy acknowledging that some employees would disappear for months or years, only to return not as better versions of themselves, but as wholly re-engineered beings. Not upgrades, but rebirths. These weren't people who had taken a seminar or read a self-help book. These were individuals now operating on frequencies and dimensions their old job descriptions couldn't comprehend. The FBI wasn't finished either. Their forensics team tried to trace your comeback to a single flashpoint. They sifted through timelines, gathered testimonies, analyzed patterns, thinking there had to be a precise origin moment. But every time they thought they had isolated the spark, they found another hidden layer, another choice, another pivot, another fragment of evidence pointing deeper. Finally, they realized your transformation wasn't a moment at all. It was a geological shift, an archaeological excavation of human potential. Every layer they unearthed led to another, proof that what you had built wasn't an event. It was an ongoing revolution of the self. And Netflix's data scientists. They're still in therapy. These are experts who thought they had cracked the code of human behavior, who had modeled every possible pattern of consumption, obsession, and attention. Yet your arc broke their models. You didn't consume content, you became content. You didn't follow narratives. You generated a narrative so strong it consumed anyone who encountered it. Their recommendation engine short-circuited. One test group opened their app and instead of suggestions, all they saw was your image, accompanied by the words, "Nothing else compares." So they brought in physicists, because surely this had to be explained by science, equations, laws, rules. But what those physicists discovered shook them to their core. Your transformation had violated not one, but several laws of conservation. Matter, energy, momentum. Things that should remain constant had bent around your existence. They realized you had turned pain into energy without waste, converted loss into momentum without drag, recycled betrayal into forward motion without decay. You weren't just surviving physics, you were rewriting it. One physicist even confessed in a private report, "What we are observing is not human resilience. It is something beyond our current framework of understanding." This subject appears to have tapped into a perpetual source of transformation, a living engine of possibility. Energy isn't supposed to multiply like that. Matter isn't supposed to restructure itself at will. Time isn't supposed to bend just because one soul refuses to accept anything less than destiny. And yet, you broke all three laws in a single breath. Physicists, philosophers, and mystics sat at the same table for the first time in history, trying to explain what had just happened. Equations collapsed, formulas shattered, and even language itself seemed too small to describe it. They called it the paradox of intentional evolution. Because how does someone consciously direct their own metamorphosis? How does someone architect their own resurrection with no blueprint, no guide, no surgeon? How does someone perform surgery on their own soul, cutting out dead parts, stitching in light, and come out not weaker, not scarred, but more alive than ever before? The equations don't balance, but the evidence can't be denied. You stand here as proof. Your comeback didn't just inspire, it rewrote the laws of attraction itself. You generated your own gravitational field, people, resources, opportunities. Things that once floated beyond reach suddenly bent toward you. Not because you chased them, but because you became the center of gravity. You became a force that attracts instead of pursues. What had once been the physics of desperation flipped into the physics of magnetism. The old way was clawing, begging, trying to hold on. Your way was different. You radiated such undeniable power that everything aligned naturally, like planets orbiting a new sun. But the strangest phenomenon was quantum entanglement. People you'd never met, people who had no way of knowing your story, reported life changes on the exact days of your major breakthroughs. A woman in Tokyo left her abusive job the day you walked out of your own darkness. A man in Brazil started his business on the same day you stepped into your new identity. It was as if your decision to rise sent ripples through the collective unconscious, as if your refusal to stay buried whispered across dimensions, giving silent permission for millions to rise with you. Your comeback wasn't just yours. It became everyone's comeback. Netflix, desperate for one last attempt, assembled the most decorated documentary crew on Earth. Academy Award winners, legendary war correspondents, filmmakers who had captured revolutions, miracles, disasters. They lasted 3 days. On the 4th, the director stormed out, pale and shaking. "You can't document this," he told executives. "It's like trying to film enlightenment itself. The camera records something, but what's happening exists in a dimension beyond its lens. We reviewed the footage and it doesn't match our experience. It's like the real transformation lives outside the frame." The sound engineer reported frequencies that don't exist in nature, tones outside the known spectrum. The cinematographer said light itself bent differently around you, curving, refracting, dancing as if space recognized your gravity. The editor swore entire frames appeared that nobody had filmed. Moments that materialized between moments, transitions that happened without human hands. Your comeback was literally writing itself in real time, not as a film, but as a living event. Then came the interviews. They tried to capture your past through people who knew you before. But every interview ended the same way. They would begin describing who you once were, the struggles, the failures, the brokenness. Then, mid-sentence, they would stop. Silence would fill the room. Their eyes would widen as realization hit. "But that person doesn't exist anymore," they'd whisper. "I'm talking about a ghost. The one who came back. That's someone else entirely. Someone we never saw coming." And then the imitators arrived, waves of them. Coaches, influencers, gurus desperate to reverse engineer your arc. They launched 30-day miracle boot camps. Become legendary like them, workshops. Some even marketed a fake FBI-approved comeback method. But every single one collapsed. Not because the steps were wrong, but because they missed the essence. You can't duplicate authenticity. You can't mass-produce a soul's private decision to stop being buried. You can't monetize the second someone declares, "I will not die here." The imitators wanted success without crucifixion. They wanted resurrection without burial. They wanted transformation without destruction. But your comeback wasn't polished, it was forged. It wasn't a strategy, it was survival. You didn't follow a 5-step plan. You followed pain all the way to its conclusion and found power waiting on the other side. You didn't design your comeback. You reached a breaking point so absolute that it became a turning point. You didn't climb out because you were ready. You climbed out because staying down became impossible. And that was the element they could never replicate. Because your arc required a destruction most people aren't willing to endure. It required you to set fire to everything false and stand alone in the ashes until something true emerged. It required you to drown completely before you could learn to breathe underwater. One by one, the imitation courses shut down, the workshops emptied, the seminars evaporated, because they were trying to teach swimming to people who first needed to experience drowning. They wanted the light without the fire. But your comeback required a burial, and they weren't willing to endure the death. That's why your story remains singular. That's why it remains unstoppable. Because resurrection without burial isn't resurrection at all, it's theater. And you didn't give them theater. You gave them truth. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the growth of my faith. Help me trust you even when physical evidence is lacking. Let me believe in your perpetual presence, knowing you will never harm me. I understand that your thoughts for me are thoughts of prosperity and not harm to give me a good future. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer up this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am grateful for your presence in my life and the abundance you bring. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you'd like to support our work, please consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. This helps us continually improve our content to offer you the best. The link to Buy Me a Coffee is in the description. No gift is too small. Whether it's a penny, a prayer, or a share, your generosity helps spread God's word and brings hope to others. Don't stop here. Watch our next video for powerful revelations about the signs that reveal you are the chosen one. We've enjoyed following this spiritual journey with you. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Keep shining brightly and embrace your destiny with courage. See you next time. Blessings to all the beautiful souls from the Enlighten wisdom.